at Bitcoin 2022 in Miami with Bernard. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, very good. Good conference. Lots of fun times. Lots of people participating in workshops, and we've been working on the free and open source workshop space. And we've had a lot of interest, a lot of people coming in. And what's been great about it is I started making a few of these offline points of sale devices, which go down really well at workshops, and they're cheap to make and they're fun. And then when I'd teach someone how to make one, and then someone else would come along and want to make one, and then the person I just taught would then start teaching the person.
Hold on. So we try to keep this as simple as possible for people who are not so familiar with your work, and also for people who are actually not that familiar with all that stuff. Right?
Yeah. We're making some assumptions.
Well, so first of all, for me, I think you're a household brand almost. You're the guy, I think, in the Bitcoin space or Lightning space that is someone that's really dedicated to produce things in a way that's accessible to everyone. So maybe we start with just you. Your story. How did you get into Bitcoin? What made you say, I'm gonna spend a lot of time building devices and just exploring the technology, right?
So a few years ago, we had the Lightning Network go live, and then that opened up a whole load of possibility for devices sending small amounts of value to one another. And I went to the wonderful Lightning Hack Day organised by Fulmo and Christian Rutzel, people like that in Berlin. And there were people there who were using nodes to power something like a sweep machine. So you could pay a QR code, and then the sweep machine would spit some sweets out, but it was using a full node. So I thought it'd be nice to make use of some microcontrollers and smaller devices, which could then be secondary devices, and then have the node as a main device somewhere safe, and just talks to the node to get the invoice, displays it, and then you can pay for the sweets. So I started working on that, and then I realised there really wasn't much of a maker community when it came to sort of IoT devices. So in Bitcoin, we're very hip on people building nodes and things, and that's great. But we also need to have people building things
like the open source nodes.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned the maker culture, maker community. So that's like a movement before Bitcoin, essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there were plenty of people in Bitcoin who were interested in making things, of course.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem to be kind of promoted as something. I remember sitting with another maker, Stephen Snyder, of a Spectre wallet, and we could count on one hand who was playing with these microcontrollers to make IoT devices. And we thought that kind of sucks. We want more people in there. At the time, I think it was just me, Stephen, Justin Moon as well, and then maybe a couple of others. So we wanted to kind of encourage that. And also personally, I then made the sweep machine. People liked it. And then I realised you could add a keypad and then use the screen and the keypad to generate input an amount and then generate an invoice. So then you have a Lightning point of sale. And then it's there aren't any point of sales off the shelf you can buy for Lightning currently. So we need to build our own. And also it's kind of important that when we move into a future of IoT, that users have control over the devices, or else they're going to be under the control of big corporations, governments, and when we're using Bitcoin, then there can be some supply chain attacks, which can be quite bad. So with hardware wallets, for example, the factories who are making the hardware wallets, they're making hardware wallets. So to have a scene of people making DIY hardware wallets using off-the-shelf devices creates some really interesting use cases, such as the Seed Signer, which is a great project. So now we have a really healthy, thriving maker community in Bitcoin. And
those are just people that have a 3D printer, and they order some hardware, and they just build hardware.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily have to have a 3D printer. They could just buy some off-the-shelf electronics device. There's some sort of pre-packaged microcontroller devices, generic microcontroller devices you can retrofit for using Bitcoin. From that, so say if I built a point of sale or an ATM or a vending machine, I would hit some pain points, I would have to make a C Lightning version, an LND version, an OpenNode version, an LMPay version, and what I wanted is just to make one version of that gizmo. And the easiest way to do that is just have a middleware piece of software which I could plug into, and then the middleware piece of software could have any funding source sitting underneath it. So that's where the idea of LMBits came from. The simple wallet account system, where each wallet's got its own API, and it's very easy to make new wallets. And then also, like, I like sort of just making proof of concept things and hacking around and exploring some sci-fi, use cases for Bitcoin on Lightning. Suddenly we've got this payment system where we could do these microtransactions. So every time someone made something, like make a jukebox or they make some sort of like with FOSS or something online, they were replicating all this work. They were having to deal with the node, getting invoices, doing this stuff. So it sort of made sense that we would also have an extension framework, and then if you put an extension on bits, other people could make use of that as well. So from the hardware came the software, and now when I build these things, it's so easy because I can just develop for LM bits. It's free and open source, it's hardened, it's being used, it's got contributors, good eyes on the code, and I can just use that and develop for that specifically. So it's not been like, there wasn't like a moment where I had like any divine inspiration or anything. Like, I'm pretty much a moron when it comes to development. My code's not great, but it kind of runs okay. But thankfully, there's some great developers in Bitcoin who are very encouraging, and they come in and they help and they refactor and they contribute. So this is one of the great things about which I encourage people not to feel scared about trying to develop on solutions, even if they think they're a bad programmer or developer or whatever, because there are lots of people out there who will just totally help you just for the very fact that you're putting in some effort, you're trying, So for example, with my sweep machine, it was kind of a hobby project, but I honestly spent about 4 months trying to just render the QR code on the screen. And then eventually, once I'd done that, I could then use that again and again, and it got refactored.
So there's like the sticker, no shitcoins inside. What made you focus only on Bitcoin and Lightning?
It's just, there's cool stuff out there. There's cool stuff being built on Ethereum, which is really interesting. But for me, I don't know how these people have like such can understand all these different protocols and all their value propositions, and then understand them in such a way that they can actually, verify that they're not built on sand themselves. I say there's some cool projects on Ethereum. I think there are, but the Ethereum itself does kind of feel like a castle built on sand, which then isn't great for the projects which then built on top of Ethereum. What's great actually in Bitcoin is we get a lot of Ethereum developers who had to leave Bitcoin because they weren't microtransactions. They're now coming back to Bitcoin and they're like, oh cool, we can build on Lightning now, great. So it's great seeing them come back. So yeah, bring them all back, build that functionality into the stuff which actual developers building interesting things. Those developers from Ethereum, it's great that we're now getting them back coming into like Bitcoin and Lightning protocols.
Right. So we're here at Bitcoin 2022 Miami. They're like 25,000 people, no coiners mostly. Yeah. You're in front of the open source stage, and you have like this table with hardware. So how was your experience there? What do you do there? And what's your experience?
Well, so in Europe, we have more of a kind of tradition of conferences having kind of a makerspace.
Like small niche.
Yeah, like people building stuff and workshops and things, whereas there seems to be less of that in the US so much, maybe a big conference like this. So in 2019, me and Stefan, in fact, we put a couple of tables together, and that was the hack space. Then in 2020, I think, or 2021, the conference had a dedicated tent, which they were doing workshops and things. Yeah. And then this year now we've got a whole stage area. And then I've been talking to the conference organisers, and next year they want to even scale up even more, which I won't talk too much about, but that's very exciting for me. So it's great to see that they understand the importance of this scene, and they're trying to nurture it, and like a lot of people got free tickets from open source projects as well. So I think the conference organisers have been absolutely fantastic, like really trying to encourage the free and open source stuff. Of course, they've got to have the industry side of it, but it's also nice as well to have like an arena where the industry sector, for-profit industry sector, they can interact with the free and open source community who are building a lot of the value proposition which is in Bitcoin, and then these industry players are then able to harness that value proposition and use it to create capital. So it's important. So it's kind of a good space where those two worlds can meet. And every time I've been to these the Bitcoin conference, every year it's just getting better. So yeah, long may it continue.
So maybe like playing devil's advocate, like is the open source community only there to build the code for corporates to commercialize it?
Well, no, I mean, so it's all about if you need, it's about control, isn't it? if you want to have autonomy and if you want to be able to actually truly run software and hardware with your own rules, it needs to be verifiable, and that's why Bitcoin is based on free and open source software, and that's why it's important that people have access to free and open source software. So absolutely they can use these commercial solutions, but it's very important they also have access, and it's easy to access the free and open source solutions as well. Some companies in the space are great at supporting that, and I think there's definitely a balance which could be made by having like a company, for-profit company, which then supports the free and open source side of things. So it needs to exist just so people can have true autonomy over their devices and over their software.
Do you see a great trend in that regard? So that it's always been the case that big corporates depend on code that's open source and they give back and they commit to give back. But now with Bitcoin, it's a whole new paradigm basically that this is for the people. And do you sense that there's a new sense for that it's really important for everyone in the industry to pull on one string, or like at least give back and make sure that we, like Jack Dorsey for instance, right, and even Jack Mallers, right? So in his presentation, he announced that they have this great partnership with this mega global point of sale operator, but he made sure in his presentation you can run your Lightning node through Tor, and still it's all an open access network. Do you see that is becoming more present with the Bitcoin industry, that people recognize, okay, whatever we do as a business, we want to make sure that this open access.
Yeah, well, they have to, and then I think I do have.
So that was a conclusion. They have to.
Well, that happened in software in general, didn't it? So if you look at the the mid '90s, and you see those interviews with Linus Torvalds and Alan Cox, who were working on Linux, and they were just like in these little tiny houses, and they had Microsoft and Apple were scared of what the power of this thing which they were building, because they knew that eventually they're going to have to engage in it. And their immediate response, in the proprietary software sector, was to try and stamp that out, which is where this sort of mentally contamination thing came from. And but then over time, now Microsoft contributes free and open source code, and a lot of these big companies and corporations understand that they have to engage with that space, incorporate into their business models, or else they're just going to fall behind, because they can't compete with the number of contributors which a lot of these free and open source projects have. And then similarly in Bitcoin, it's the same. Like, if a company wants to be successful, they've really got to support the free and open source section of the industry. The problem with Strike is that when it comes to something like LNURL, for example, all these wallets are supporting this protocol which was developed by the developers working in Bitcoin on Lightning. They wanted certain functionality which didn't exist on Lightning as natively, so they created this protocol themselves within their own time, not being paid or anything, and then all these wallets they went out and helped all these wallets implement LNURL, and now Strike have said, well, they're not going to implement LNURL. Instead, they're going to say, this is how we want people to engage with Lightning Network. So you have this kind of top down, we're not going to support this thing which is being developed by the actual community of builders and users. We're going to impose and say, this is by our market dominance, that this is how we want things to be done. So they need to sort their shit out when it comes to that. They need to start implementing the LNURL stuff, and some of the stuff which it just pisses a lot of people off, and it sucks for me too, because I can't recommend Strike. I'm making these things, these free and open source point of sale, and it can be offline, and it's really useful in like a poor country where they got crappy internet, it will make sense for Strike to just implement that protocol. So but the people who are working on Strike, Mr. Felton and Rockstar Dev, they're some of my heroes. They're incredible, and they worked on this on Zap, and Rockstar works on BTC Pacer, which is an absolutely beautiful project. And they've implemented those. BTC Pacer server can do LNURL, so they've implemented that protocol there on the free and open source software. So I really think that I just hope to see it happen in Strike. Right. That there's more of a connection there between what the industry as a whole wants and what Jack Mallers' vision. He has to sort of get past his own personal vision.
So let's talk about this little beast there, this little orange thing. What does it do? I think what I know about it is that I think a big pain point is if I be to pay a merchant, say in El Salvador, right? And a lot of street shops there, they don't have internet actually. So how do I pay someone when Lightning requires you to have an internet connection? How can I send a Lightning payment if it requires to be online? Is that thing any cure?
Yeah, so I mean, like, we're lucky that being in this very new technology, which allows all this incredible new functionality, we're able to kind of break new ground, and it's an amazing feeling to build something which hasn't really existed before, and then you're the first one to kind of build that thing. I really like that feeling. So with the point of sale, I realised with LN Pay, which is part of the LN protocol, because it's based LN URL, so it's basically an encrypted URL, and it's a standard which says that your wallet will do a GET request to this URL, and then if it gets back some data, then it will act on that data and pay an invoice or pull for it or give the server an invoice. The party's kicking off. So what I realised we could do is have a shared secret which exists on the device and then also exists on the server software, the LN-Bit software, and when you make a transaction here and an LN Pay constructs an LN Pay in the device, I can add an encrypted PIN, 4-digit PIN, which is generated randomly at the point of transaction. Then that's handed to the server because it's in the LN URL, so it's given to the server. Then the server can locate the POS ID. By the POS ID, it can locate the secret on the server, and then once the invoice has been paid, it can give the decrypted PIN as a receipt. So what that means is that this can be just offline, and it actually, I mean, like, we talk about this kind of like it being useful in countries where there's limited infrastructure, but actually, like, in Miami, for example, that you'll go to pay for something and their terminal's kind of slow, it's kind of clunky. And if the user is using their phone, which they're doing with a Lightning wallet, then there's no reason why their phone can't be the intermediary to send that data as opposed to the POS itself. So it just kind of switches it from that legacy system. Then it's that thing, you break through with one concept, and then the kind of obvious idea is, well, what happens if when the user gets that PIN back, they can then input it into something. And that's where the vending machine kind of came from. It's the exact same project, more or less, except when they get the PIN, they select a product on there, and then it does the same thing. They get the PIN back as a receipt, they put the PIN in there, then the vending machine knows that the person has paid, just because it's the same PIN as what was generated in the vending machine, and then it can spit the product out. And then it's like, well, that's, if you think about a world where cash is becoming less prevalent, and you have vending machines, or do all those vending machines now have to be online to accept card payments, or can they be offline? It's much more useful for them to be offline, because then you don't need to worry about your internet connection. I could take this, put a battery in it, I can go stick it anywhere in Miami, and someone could come up to it, pay for products using Bitcoin, and I can see it going into my wallet. So it's like, and then it's interesting actually, because I didn't realise, but there's a whole scene of people working on dark vending. So that's the idea of having a vending machine. You could put like contraband products in.
Tungsten enforced vending machines.
Yeah, well, it's just it's a way of selling contraband, which kind of limits violence because you haven't got human interaction. Someone who wants something can just go to this vending machine and pay, and then it's the owner of the vending machine and the products inside of it doesn't have to go back to the vending machine. I mean, they may go back and try and fill it up, but as long as the vending machine pays for itself and the products inside, everything else becomes profit.
Yeah, and fully autonomous.
Yeah. So it just means that someone can just put contraband in there, put it up somewhere, have someone maybe keep an eye on it, but it's kind of hard to censor. I didn't realise that there's this weird niche of people who've been theorising dark vend. And it's kind of interesting then, it's like, oh, okay, I didn't build it for that, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's how Bitcoin succeeds ultimately, right? Like Bitcoin has been successful maybe for a large extent because it's freedom of transaction, and like Silk Road attracted so many people because they demand a certain product. Well, you judge whether they should or should not do that, but ultimately the money should be neutral. right? So
Yeah, exactly.
dark branding, it's just
yeah.
like, well, if there's a demand, well, maybe somebody just gonna serve it. And
Yeah.
of course, I mean, like there are certain immoral things we may not want to support, but ultimately there's, for a large deal, there's a stupid regulation that just hinders peaceful people from transacting. So you saying this little hardware piece is basically like it crushes through an immense wall of a fence, right, of regulation and structure. So what makes you so exciting about building these things? So you mentioned that what really, I think, what motivates this community is the fact that you have this opportunity to to make it easier for people to do these things. So maybe you could just elaborate, like what's exciting for you to build these things.
It's that it's that permissionless innovation, isn't it? Like you say,
permissionless innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're able to innovate, build something, and I can have my node running, I can have LM bits running on top of my node at home, and then I can start accepting payments, and I don't have to make any banking relationships or anything. Like if you want to, and then when you open it up, like people will innovate on top of the POS, and they'll think we could add this function, that function, and see this, blah, blah, blah. And then this is permissionless, and you can open up, you can change it, and you can have it interact with other services other than LM bits, whatever.
So it's really so I think what people don't realize is, right, so open source and DIY has always been following these principles.
Yeah.
So it's always like, well, you have a 3D printer, just build whatever you want.
Well, I mean, so
bank and finance is not that way, because you need a regulation, you need a license there, like it's like a very, very tough, like it's almost impossible without like $1 billion on the account to play.
Yeah.
Now some you say like, well, play.
Well, look at Richard Stallman when he came up with the Free Software. Richard Stallman,
right?
When he came up with the Free Software Foundation, that was partly because him and his mates, they would make something in science, they would make some code, and then if someone needed someone else's code, they'd be like, yeah, here you go, and they'd help each other out, and there's kind of community discussion and things. And then the big corporates then tried to have proprietary control over that software, and they saw it as their own product because they'd employed these people to build that product, and that's when they started to install all these like proprietary licenses. And then Richard Stallman's argument was actually, no, this is science, this is information, this should be out there, it should be free, people should be able to have access to it. And then from that, you had then one of his talks as a young lad there, Linus, and then he went and built the Linux kernel. So that whole revolution came away from that idea that engineers and builders who are making something and they want to share it with the world, they don't want that to be restricted by some corporate, corporate profit mechanism, whatever. I think it's very much kind of like a lot of engineers when they're building something, they just want the world to experience it and use it. And with free and open source, with Git, with all the things we've built, which facilitate that, it becomes very interesting because there's a whole new form of production which isn't like feudalist in the same way which other forms of production. Well, some free and open source projects have the benevolent dictator model, but whatever. Like there's a new way of kind of producing something, which also is very interesting to me.
Who owns lmbits.com?
Well, I own lmbits.com. Yeah.
So back on that.
But,
so you mentioned,
I own lmbits.com, but lmbits, the software
right.
is just a free and open source piece of project. And if I own lmbits.com and then turn it into a scammy site, so free and open source, it's licensed in the free and open source, you fork it, you call it, fuck it, whatever.
Go ahead and fork it.
Yeah,
so you touched on that before, and it seemed to me that you already had this idea about it, right? So that like you actually encourage profit companies to go ahead, right, and use the code. So what's your strategy for that? So you provide the IP, essentially, right? So the intellectual property or the actual algorithm, right, or the actual piece that's required to build a profitable business, and you say, okay, look, corporates, here, that's what we want, that's what we think is right. What's your dream or vision how that should continue to be, given that BitPay, for instance, right? So there, many people criticize it for being not very beneficial to Bitcoin, and actually,
I think it's like the attitude.
Look, in simple terms, something is beeping. Something is. I think
it's the attitude of the company. So there's plenty of companies in Bitcoin which will go and use some free and open source project and then try and pretend they've made something, they've innovated, and they won't do that. So this is why in science, in academia, that it's very important that you have referencing and that you don't try and plagiarize. And plagiarism is kind of frowned upon. Like absolutely, free and open source, you can do that, but it's kind of being a dick. You know what I mean? So like some companies which I love, which are working in Bitcoin currently, I'm very excited about, is IBEX. IBEX Mercado, they're the Guatemalan bank, because they use these free open source projects, but then they're quite public about it. They'll say this was great, thank you for this. They used Island Biz for a little while, and also they're innovating. They have a big R&D department. They're excited about their technology, and they're innovating, and they're trying to build community. And they've been here for a couple of months in Miami, like getting restaurants and cafes to adopt Lightning payments. So they're a private company, and there's nothing wrong against private companies if they have the right kind of, I mean, it's okay to say that there's different forms of capital, and they're good. They're good. I'm enjoying what they're doing in the space. Another one is Coin Corner, which is an Isle of Man. What was it, Coin Floor? I never remember because they changed from Coin Corner to Coin Floor. Anyway, that's it. They're an Isle of Man company, and they're innovating as well. I've talked to them quite a lot because they've taken like some of my proof of concepts. Like I did an NFC payment using LNURL, and they've taken that and then they kind of built on top of that. But they've been very good to really sort of give me props. They've kind of gone beyond, so which has been really complimentary to me. And also, it's just been nice to see that they're excited about the technology, and they're like, "Whoa, this is cool! I could do this thing," and then they want to build on it, So I think it's important that happens within a company which is making use of free and open source. It's not necessary, of course. You can quite often licensing, just go and do what you want with it, but it's kind of good form,
Right. Well, look, I think what I would be interested in, actually personally, I would be very interested to do a little review of crypto processing candidates. I'll throw a few names or brands in the ring, and then you could share your opinion.
I warn you, I'm not very well informed. I mean, so I have some.
So look,
I have limited scope on subjects.
Okay. So let's BitPay and OpenNode. You're aware of, I guess.
I like OpenNode a lot.
And I think a few more maybe that are present right now is so what I remember really early on was there was CoinGate and Coin Payments. I think they're like more. No, you don't know. Okay, right. Do you know crypto processing? Okay.
I mean, I know BitPay. I spoke to them
about that.
Accepting Lightning.
Let's compare BTC Pay Server, BitPay, and OpenNode.
Well, I mean, BTC Pay Server would be. I mean, so that's like a free and open source project, isn't it? And they're a foundation as well, so they haven't actually got a corporate arm, which is pretty cool.
Why would a merchant decide to do all that hassle, buy hardware and have a maintenance, expenditure, problem basically?
I mean, they don't have to. I mean, they could just go and use something like OpenNode. OpenNode, I think one of OpenNode's great strengths as a product is consistent.
With the cost of having to pay a fee and KYC.
Yeah, but I mean, but consistently, if there's a company who just wants to accept some Lightning payments, for years now, one of the best solutions for them is to just go get an OpenNode account. If they're a physical business, which does KYC anyway, and they're going to register with the tax authority, then just go use OpenNode. Joao and the people who work at OpenNode, they've provided this incredibly stable service, which people use, and it's useful. Like they used it in El Salvador when I went to McDonald's to pay for my McDonald's. They were using OpenNode because it makes sense, because it's McDonald's. They're not doing anything which then you sense your persistence.
I mean, in Salvador was at the beginning was only IBEX and Chiro.
Well, there was IBEX, but in a lot of the big franchises, OpenNode had been in there, and they'd done the legwork, and they'd help implement.
I was so surprised. I was in this hotel for breakfast, and I paid my bill, and I said, do you accept Bitcoin? Yeah, sure, because they have to. And they came around with a tablet, and BTC Pay. I was like, oh wow, amazing.
Yeah, good. Yeah, well, that was another good thing of why I like IBEX as well, with all the Chiva wallet debacle. You would go to pay for something, the Chiva wallet wouldn't work, and then you say, we've got any other wallets, and they'd say, oh yeah, I've got IBEX, and they get IBEX up, and it would just work. And you're like, now you're getting the experience. You're going to go home. You're going to say, well, don't use that Chivo shit. Use the IBEX shit. And the good projects kind of rise to the surface. So, but it's just nice to see there's some people, and particularly because they're in a neighbouring country, in Guatemala. So, they're ideally placed to kind of support, the Lightning and Bitcoin experiment which is happening in El Salvador. And it's good to see that they had some good hands there, and it wasn't all just the Chivo nonsense.
Right. Awesome, man. So I think we kind of covered mostly the important things that you're developing in the whole community and stuff. So I'd like to go on and ask you a little bit more personally, what drives you and stuff. So then I think something special probably at some point in your life happened that made you especially motivated to work in these things. Do you have any idea what that could have been?
Well, I mean, you want to make the world a better place, but then I think this is where a lot of excitement comes from with Bitcoin. People want to make the world a better place, but they're disenfranchised and they just feel apathetic. And there's all these big structures and apparatus which is impossible to change. And what could I possibly do? Then you hit the free and open source stuff, and you're like, okay, I can just literally run a program. If I find a bug, I can submit it. Now I'm making a difference, right? And then with money, not money, but Bitcoin. You realise that there's a superstructure which is controlled and regulated by the community as a whole, and is a worldwide apparatus and the commons which anyone can access, and it's not controlled by any centralised party, be it state, be it private control. And by participating in it, by supporting it, you can pull the rug out from all these traditional power and legacy structures where a collection of self-interested people have an immense amount of power over things like money production, for example. So you can improve one of the most important functions of the entire society, which is just how we transfer value to one another. And then going into the future, where there's this definite pressure to lever more control over people via payment networks, by getting rid of cash, by getting us to use centralized payment systems. It's really very important that people have something with the properties of cash, which can be done in a digitally native way.
What are the properties of cash?
Well, so I can transfer with you, freedom of transaction. I can transfer with you, and there isn't someone else in the room. Like, there isn't some big horrible private bank which does loads of evil stuff in the world, like harnessing value out of something which is a very personal interaction. And that if people want to have relationships with banks, fine, but it should be forced upon them. And that's what governments try and do by effectively, getting rid of cash. And I know that cash obviously is created by central banks, but whatever. Like, it still has these privacy properties which are really good.
Interesting. People are arguing that renewable energy is in fact a environmental disaster. The windmills, the carbon fiber is hard to recycle. With phones, we already have an issue with the batteries to recycle them. Now, electric vehicles, kind of 100x that output. And so really, truly, things like nuclear power would be actually more sustainable, thinking of
I don't know about that.
The output.
You have a nuclear meltdown, it destroys the world.
Is there any agreement?
No, I mean, I'm someone who very much thinks that
shared value though.
I very much think that the world has a limited amount of resources, and humans, by eating up resources, can certainly impact the world by releasing lots of carbon into the atmosphere, and then we can cause some pretty horrific climate disasters, which involves mass migrations of people across the planet. And then people will say, well, we've gone through these cycles before, and it's like, yeah, okay, we have. And when there's this mass extinction event and most of us are dead, then nature will rebuild itself and the world will eventually heal. However, like, that process will, so if you look at the amount of problem that when you have like a group of people move from one place, so you look at people fleeing some conflict in Central or South America, moving up into America, and how much political turmoil that causes, or the Syrian refugees moving across Europe, how that almost brings Europe to the brink of war, because people have all these sentiments that their country in some way is a resource they should only have access to because they were born there. So it's something we really need to. I mean, obviously, like, it's the thing which could bring us all to an end very quickly. Bitcoin has, it's contradictory, because Bitcoin has this huge carbon footprint. It does, and the way it's mined isn't good. Now, when I do a transaction, on-chain transaction, there's a lot of carbon which is involved in that on-chain transaction. And if I'm just sending like a couple £100, it's not worth it. I should just send it in pounds for the utter disaster in which it's causing. However, if you take that Bitcoin transaction and then if you make it more economically viable by making it setting up a lightning channel and doing loads of throughput, loads of transactions through it, by adding lots of other extra commodity use cases into Bitcoin, which I think we all inherently feel there may be. So for me, Bitcoin is like gold. You find it on the surface, and then at the ground we all get excited about it. We all start transferring this thing as value, but then ultimately gold's got these immense amount of commodity value use cases, such as jewelry, electronics, dentistry, whatever. Bitcoin's very similar, but even more commodity use cases. Then a social scalability thing where there's all this legacy stuff which is actually very carbon heavy in itself, and Bitcoin can replace that. And so what I've seen in the conference actually, which is very good, is people actively engaging in researching renewable mining and whether it really is feasible. There's people like Troy Cross, there's Margot as well, and a whole bunch of other people within the Bitcoin space who are very much concerned about the environmental impact of Bitcoin, and they're really researching it. And I really hope that, as well as us doing more things with on-chain transactions and just transferring value from one person to another, I really hope that the renewable thing, it does incentivize renewable mining, for example, and mining can be used as a way to kind of create more economic viability for renewable power production.
What's your view on the concern or fear of the ESG, the environmental campaign, to fire back on people in that way that just like a citizen score, a carbon tax essentially could be a tax on the air you breathe out, right? So could that be essentially used to tax a human being on its air usage?
Well, I mean, there's always going to be anyone who any government which has policies, they're always going to try and use it to gain more control. That's just what they do. But then there's a lot of these sentiments are from a good place, and then the carbon tax and carbon credit system. I think there's some real issues with that, and again, maybe Bitcoin can help in some regard in that. But I mean, we just got to make this stuff more efficient. We just got to buy efficient, do more with it, and then just really try and do more research, get more data. This is why people like Margot, she was one of the talks at the speakers at the conference, are so important, because they're doing the research. It's not just like Bitcoin might fix.
So you oppose a carbon tax per individual, or?
I'm not saying anything about carbon tax. I'm just saying, like, when it comes to Bitcoin, I mean, I'm not like I'm not someone who can speak. I'm not an expert. Go speak to Troy Cross, go speak to Margot. Maybe not Troy Cross, maybe Margot.
Would you prefer humanity to use more energy, or not?
Pardon?
Would you prefer humanity to expand on its energy production and usage?
Yeah, but with the renewables as opposed to carbon-heavy energy. I mean, energy. Society's advancement generally is aligned with energy,
right.
But there's loads of consumables and stuff which maybe kind of gets factored into that, which might not be accurate.
Yeah.
And then you say, what is a successful society, and how do you measure that? And it's a pretty tricky question.
And do you agree though that the energy source, renewable, what is that, right? So could it maybe also mean that so you say nuclear power is not renewable?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying nuclear power is very, very dangerous, and we've proven that in the past. And humans are idiots. So, it's the sort of thing which we could almost wish we could uninvent.
On the other hand, do you agree that there are also opposite views on?
Some people say, well, a good form of energy would be nuclear. But this isn't a debate which I can't really gauge in, to be honest, because it's out of my realm of
let's go on.
I'm a very limited guy.
I think what I like about this discussion in general, I think, is that there are a lot of people out there that that come from a influence of say they have big sense for justice and social justice from the left spectrum, right? So I think you're someone that is defending Bitcoin in a way, right? Still, you say Bitcoin is actually enabling those minorities or vulnerable people, or dead people, right? So that I think that's generally like the slogan of the left, let's say. So maybe you could say, I would like to ask you. So there are left-wing parties all around Europe, and their agendas are similar, maybe all over European countries, and similarly, the people following that. Why would they look into Bitcoin when basically the signal, or most of the information, would rather tell them to not do?
I don't know why it would tell them not to.
Well, I think so. At least to my experience, I think most people that are concerned about politics from a left wing angle, they would say, look, first of all, general arguments like
Yeah, I mean,
these are criminals.
No, it would, no,
it's
a huge. I mean, it's a generalisation of opinion. But yeah, I mean, people on the left are people who you classify as on the left or on the right. People on the right, the superficial understanding of Bitcoin, which they see in papers and stuff, number go up nonsense. That's something which kind of the greed aspect is something which turns away people on the left, but then people on the left who are into things like consensus, decentralization, commons, cooperatives, then they very much, once they get past that superficial understanding of Bitcoin, can appreciate.
In the air again.
Ben, we ran out of time basically.
The phone is a nice conversation, man. It's great to it's great. I mean, those conversations need to be had, don't they? It's the dialectic, we have synthesis, we have a thesis, an antithesis, and then we have synthesis, and that's what we need to do, and that's how we get great liberty in society.
I predict, so the last question, and then I think that's the breaking news for me at least. So I love human progress on the individual level as well as on the collective level, and I respect someone that says I was wrong, or even somebody that just ventured on and said, like 10 years ago, I was that stupid, right? So and one marker I think is the Twitter handle. So I think you change it.
No, fuck that, man. I mean, if you,
it's amazing.
No, but if you're referring to the fact that I used to be called BTC Socialist and now I'm Ben Ark, the reason I did that was because I do a lot of free and open source development, and it wasn't fair that when I was promoting that free and open source development, there was some political association, which because there were plenty of
you just want to utilize it.
There's just plenty of contributors into those projects, and I shouldn't be, and also it limits the scope and reach of my personal profile to be able to get some of those projects out. Cause the Twitter space, people block and mute each other over silly things. So it's not that I've in any way like hung up my lefty hat. It's more that within that platform, before. I threw that flag up because it was important that people were aware that the left has definitely saw value proposition in Bitcoin, and then that seems to have been established pretty well. We've got plenty of people on the socialist, anarchist, leftist, left libertarian, socialist, libertarian side who are very active now in the Bitcoin community, and hopefully I played a part in that. But I want to focus more on promoting the hardware stuff.
To finish off the interview, where can people find you? What's the Twitter handle now?
So Ben Ark, I don't know, I think it's Ark BTC.
Ark BTC, you see?
It's the same.
So technology is neutral,
It's the same. It's the same.
Apolitical.
It's the same profile. Well, there we are. Good. So yeah, it's like trying to. Is email political? It's a political. It's SMPT. Is that political? Is FTP political? Whatever.
This is really amazing, man. This is cool.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Yeah, have a good one. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Bye.